My father abandoned me on my wedding day to go with my stepsister, but when she uninvited him and he came back begging to walk me down the aisle, and my stepdad was already there, and what I did left them all speechless. I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance writer after studying journalism, and honestly, I need to get this off my chest, because what happened at my wedding 6 months ago basically confirmed what I'd been feeling my whole life, that I was never important enough for my dad. The thing is, this goes way back, like since I was 16 when my parents got divorced. But I guess I should start there, so you understand the full context of why things got to where they got. When I was 16, my parents separated, and it was weird because it wasn't one of those super dramatic divorces with fights and door slams. They just didn't work together anymore. You know, they'd grown distant over the years. My mom kept the house, and my dad moved to an apartment like 20 minutes away. At first, everything seemed relatively normal. He'd pick me up on weekends, we'd go eat, spend time together, and I thought, okay, this isn't so bad. We can make this work. But then, literally like a year after the divorce, my dad met this woman at a work event. He's an accountant. She worked in human resources for the same company, and things moved super fast. They got married in less than a year, and she brought 2 daughters into the marriage, Brooke, who was my age, 17 at the time, and Bailey, who was like 3 years younger. At first, my stepmom seemed normal. I mean, she was nice to me when we'd see each other. She'd ask me things about school and stuff, but there was something about the dynamic that felt weird from the start. Brooke was like the perfect daughter, you know? She had good grades, was on the cheerleading team, was popular at school, and my dad seemed fascinated with her. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it was like he'd suddenly found this ready-made family, and I was the piece that didn't fit. Bailey was quieter and we never had problems, honestly. But Brooke from day one had this attitude that she was daughter number 1 and I was just the occasional visitor. Things started to change when I was in my senior year of high school. I had this important presentation for a journalism scholarship. I'd been working on the project for months, and my dad had promised to go. I reminded him like 3 times that week. He told me yes, that he'd be there, not to worry. The day of the presentation came, and I was nervous but also excited because it was a full scholarship to the university I wanted, and it meant so much to me. I did my presentation, which went well, by the way, looked through the audience searching for my dad, and he wasn't there. I called his cell. After, nothing. I texted him, nothing. Like 2 hours later, he answered, saying he was so sorry, but Brooke had an emergency with her car. She got a flat tire, and he had to go help her. A flat tire. That was more important than something I'd been working on for months. And that was like the first time, but not the last, not even close. It became a pattern. You know, where anything about Brooke automatically took priority over anything about me. My high school graduation, my dad arrived late because Brooke needed help moving things from her college dorm. My 21st birthday, he canceled the same day because Brooke was stressed about finals and needed her stepdad, my dad, to take her to dinner to de-stress. Can you believe it? And every time I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he'd tell me I was overreacting, that Brooke needed him, that I was more independent and could handle things on my own. As if being independent meant I didn't need to have a present father. The worst, like the absolutely worst thing that happened before all the wedding drama, was when I was 23 and in my last year of college. I'd gotten this amazing internship at a big newspaper. It was competitive as hell, and I was super excited because it was exactly the kind of experience I needed for my career. The thing is, like 2 weeks after I started feeling super sick. Like horrible abdominal pain, fever, vomiting, everything. At first I thought it was food poisoning or something, but it kept getting worse and worse. My mom took me to the ER. She'd remarried by then to this guy named Mark, who honestly is more of a father to me than my biological dad. But we'll get to that. And turns out my appendix had ruptured. They had to operate on me emergency because I was at risk of sepsis. It was super serious. I was in the hospital for like 4 days recovering, and my mom and Mark were there the whole time, taking turns staying with me. My dad didn't come once. Not once. I texted him saying I was in the hospital, that it was serious, and he responded saying he hoped I'd get better soon. That was it. When I got out of the hospital, I lost the internship because obviously I couldn't go during that whole critical week and they needed someone reliable. Which I understand, but it still hurt like hell because I'd worked so hard to get it. I sent my dad a long message explaining how devastated I was, and he answered with, like 2 lines saying these things happen and that I'd have other opportunities. Like 2 weeks later, there was a family dinner. One of those things where my stepmom insists we all get together to keep up appearances of happy family. I guess. My mom was there. Yeah, it was weird. But she'd go sometimes to support me. Mark, my dad, my stepmom, Brooke, Bailey, and me. The conversation somehow got to the topic of my surgery and the lost internship, and my stepmom was being sympathetic about it, saying what bad luck and that surely I'd find something just as good. Then Brooke, without anyone asking her, blurts out, "Well, at least your dad was there for me when Jake broke up with me. That was devastating." And I was like, "Wait, what?" I asked my dad if he'd been with Brooke when she broke up with her boyfriend, and he nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. I asked him when that had been, and turns out it was exactly the week I was in the hospital. That's when everything exploded. I asked him directly, "Dad, you didn't come see me in the hospital because you were consoling Brooke about her breakup?" And he got super defensive, saying that Brooke was having a really hard time and that I had my mom and Mark, as if that was the point. I told him that my appendix literally ruptured inside me, that I was at risk of dying, and he chose to stay with Brooke because her boyfriend of 3 months left her. My mom was furious. Mark was quiet, but you could see he was angry. And my stepmom started defending my dad, saying that Brooke was very sensitive and needed support. I ended up leaving that dinner crying, and my dad didn't even follow me. After that, things were tense between us for a long time. I kept seeing my dad occasionally because, I don't know, part of me kept hoping that eventually he'd realize what he was doing, but it was always the same. Brooke always came first, and I was always the understanding one, the one who could wait, the one who didn't need as much. I graduated from college, got a freelance job I liked, met Lucas at an alumni gathering. He'd studied graphic design, and we were at the same networking event, and we started dating. Lucas is like the complete opposite of all the toxic dynamic with my dad. He listens to me, supports me, makes me feel important, the basic things you should expect from someone who loves you. We'd been dating 3 years when Lucas proposed to me. It was super sweet. Nothing extravagant, but very us. At the beach where we had our first date. Obviously, I said yes, and we started planning the wedding. We wanted something relatively small, like 80 people, at this beautiful venue that had gardens and an amazing view. We booked the date almost a year in advance, in October, my favorite month, and told everyone. My dad seemed excited when I told him, said he was happy for me, that Lucas seemed like a good guy, and I thought, okay, maybe this will be different. Maybe for my wedding, he'll really to be present in the way I need. 5 months after we announced our wedding date and started sending out save the dates, Brooke announced she was also getting married. To a guy she'd been dating for like a year, which is fine. Everyone has their own timeline. But guess what date she chose for her wedding? The same as ours. Exactly the same. When I found out, I thought it had to be a mistake. Like there's no way she deliberately chose the same day knowing I already had my wedding planned. I called her and asked her directly. And she told me, "Oh, it's just that venue only had that day available, and I loved it. I can't change now." A total lie, because I knew that venue had availability several weekends. I'd seen their calendar when I was looking for places for my own wedding. I told her it was super weird that she'd chosen exactly the same day, that there were literally hundreds of other available days, and she got super defensive, saying you can't own a date. That October was a popular top month for weddings, which is true, but come on. And that I was selfish for expecting her to change her plans. I talked to my dad, hoping he'd see how absurd the situation was, and he basically told me, these things happen, that we could both have our weddings on the same day and the family would have to choose which one to go to. As if it were that simple. I asked him which one he was going to, and there was this long, uncomfortable silence before he said he'd probably have to go to Brooke's because she'd asked him first to walk her down the aisle. That destroyed me. Like, I physically felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Here I was, his biological daughter, the person who'd been waiting her whole life for him to show up for her. And once again, he was choosing Brooke. I told him I'd asked him to walk me down the aisle months before, when we got engaged, and he said yes, that he remembered, but that he felt obligated to Brooke because she'd made the formal request first. Another lie. I'd asked him formally and informally multiple times. I tried to reason with him, told him this was exactly the pattern that had been happening my whole life, that he always pushed me aside for Brooke. And he got angry, saying I was always dramatizing everything and playing the victim. I hung up and cried for like 2 hours. Lucas was furious, wanted to call my dad and tell him everything he thought, but I convinced him it wasn't worth it. My mom was also outraged. Mark said he'd be happy to walk me down the aisle if I wanted. And honestly, that meant everything to me. Mark had been in my life since I was like 19. He'd been at my college graduation. He'd supported me when I lost the internship. He'd been there for all the important things, and he'd never made me feel like a second choice. I told him yes, that I'd love for him to walk me down the aisle, and we continued with the wedding planning, trying not to let all the drama with my dad ruin something that should be happy. The months leading up to the wedding were weird. My dad basically didn't participate in any of the planning, didn't ask about the menu or decorations or anything. I was hurt, but also like I'm not even surprised anymore, you know? Brooke didn't talk to me during that time either, and from what I heard from Bailey, who was the only one who maintained neutral contact with me, Brooke's wedding was going to be this huge, super luxurious event with like 200 guests. My stepmom was super involved in every detail, and my dad had apparently paid for almost everything. Meanwhile, Lucas and I were paying for our own wedding, which was fine. We didn't expect financial help, but the contrast was obvious. The wedding day arrived, and I was excited but also nervous about the whole situation with my dad. I was at the venue getting ready with my bridesmaids. My mom was there helping me with the dress, and everything felt perfect and special. Mark arrived like an hour before the ceremony, super elegant in his suit, and gave me a long hug telling me he was proud of me and that it was going to be the best day. We were taking photos when suddenly I hear this commotion outside the bridal room, raised voices, and someone knocking on the door aggressively. My mom went to see what was happening, and when she opened the door, my dad was standing there, in jeans and a casual shirt, nothing appropriate for a wedding. He came in without anyone inviting him and said, "I need to talk to Allison. Now." I was like, what the hell is happening? And he started explaining that Brooke had uninvited him from her wedding literally 2 hours before. Apparently, they'd had some kind of fight about I don't know what wedding thing. She got angry and told him he was no longer welcome. That her biological stepdad, who'd been absent most of her life but decided to show up for the wedding, would walk her down the aisle. My dad was visibly upset, like almost crying, saying he couldn't believe that after everything he'd done for Brooke, she'd shut him out like that. And then, just like that, he tells me, "So I guess I can walk you down the aisle after all?" Just like that. As if I were the backup option. As if I should be grateful that now he was available for me because his first choice didn't work out. I was like frozen. I couldn't process that he'd actually just said that. Lucas came into the room at that moment because he heard the commotion, saw my dad there, and asked me if everything was okay. I told him no, that definitely everything was not okay. My dad started getting more insistent, saying he was my father and he had the right to walk me down the aisle. That Mark wasn't really my father, and it would be disrespectful to him if I let someone else take his place. Mark, who'd been quiet until that moment, said calmly that it was my decision and that he'd respect whatever I wanted. My dad turned to Mark and started yelling at him, saying to stay away from his family, that he had no right to get involved in this, and the situation escalated super fast. Suddenly, my dad pushed Mark, and Mark tried to calm him down, but my dad pushed him again, harder, and Mark stumbled over a chair. Lucas got in the middle, trying to separate them. My bridesmaids were screaming. My mom was calling venue security, and I was standing there in my wedding dress watching this whole surreal scene unfold 2 hours before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And finally, venue security arrived and had to physically escort my dad out. He was yelling as they took him away, saying I was going to regret it, that I was making a mistake, that Brooke was right about me. I don't even know what that means. After he left, there was this moment of silence where we all looked at each other like, what the hell just happened? Mark was fine, just a bit shaken, and kept apologizing as if somehow it had been his fault. I told him to stop, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that I was grateful he was there. My mom was furious but trying to stay calm for me. The bridesmaids were in damage control mode trying to touch up my makeup because I'd been crying. And Lucas was like ready to go find my dad and have a more serious conversation, but I convinced him to let it go. I had to make a decision right there about whether to continue with the wedding or not. Part of me wanted to cancel everything and hide, but another part, the part that had been waiting for this my whole life, said no, I'm not going to let him ruin this too. I told everyone the wedding would continue as planned. I touched up my makeup, took a deep breath, and tried to focus on the fact that I was going to marry an incredible person who loved and supported me unconditionally. The ceremony was beautiful. Mark walked me down the aisle and did it perfectly, with tears in his eyes, holding my arm so tenderly. And when they asked, "Who gives this woman?" he said her mother and I with a firm, clear voice. Lucas was waiting for me at the altar, looking at me with that look that makes everything else disappear, and when we said our vows, it was perfect. The reception was fun. We danced, ate well, our friends made nice speeches, and for a few hours, I could forget about all the drama. But obviously, it didn't end there. Like a week after the wedding, my dad sent me a message asking us to meet to talk. Honestly, I didn't want to. But Lucas told me maybe it would help to have a clear conversation about everything. So I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop. He arrived on time for the first time in probably years, and started by apologizing for having caused a scene at the wedding. But then, literally in the next sentence, he started justifying himself, saying he'd been very upset about the Brooke thing, that I didn't understand how difficult it was for him, that I should be more understanding. I told him I was tired of being understanding, that I'd been understanding my whole life while he constantly pushed me aside. For Brooke, I gave him specific examples: the scholarship presentation, my graduation, my appendix surgery, and he tried to minimize each one, saying I remembered things worse than they really were. When I mentioned that he chose to go to Brooke's wedding instead of mine, he said I'd put him in an impossible position and it wasn't fair. Can you believe it? I put him in an impossible position, not Brooke, who deliberately chose the same date as me. I tried to explain to him how I'd felt being constantly the second choice, and he said I'd always been dramatic and that I needed to stop playing the victim. Those exact words. He told me that Brooke had been through a lot in her life. Her biological father abandoned them, which, yes, was horrible, and that he was just trying to be a good stepdad to her. I told him that being a good stepdad to Brooke didn't mean he had to be a bad father to me, and he had no answer for that. The conversation ended with him basically saying that if I couldn't accept that he had responsibilities to his whole family, as if I weren't part of that family, then maybe we needed time apart. Like 3 months passed after that without talking. Brooke and her husband apparently went on their honeymoon to Europe, courtesy of my dad, I heard, and everything seemed perfect in their world. Meanwhile, Lucas and I were enjoying being married, moving in together to a new apartment, building our life. It was nice, honestly, not having the constant stress of trying to win my dad's approval. But then there was this family gathering for Thanksgiving. My grandmother, my dad's mom, organized it every year, and technically I was invited. I wasn't going to go, but my grandmother called me specifically asking me to come, saying she missed seeing me, and that the family wasn't the same without me. Lucas and I decided to go. Like, how bad could it be, right? Spoiler. Pretty bad. My dad was weird all night. Not hostile exactly, but making these passive-aggressive comments. When my uncle asked about the wedding, my dad said something like, "Oh, it was nice from what they told me. I wasn't really invited," as if I'd uninvited him on purpose. When everyone there knew what really happened. Brooke was there too with her husband, and every time someone mentioned anything about my wedding, she'd make these subtle comments about how her wedding had been at this incredible venue with this gourmet food, trying to make mine sound inferior without saying it directly. At one point during dinner, my dad was talking about how proud he was of Brooke for getting a promotion at her job, saying he always knew she'd do great things, that she was super dedicated and hardworking. I'd just gotten a big contract with an important client for my freelance work, something I'd mentioned casually before, and he didn't say a word about it. My cousin, who knew the whole story, asked my dad directly if he'd heard about my new contract, and he said, "Oh yeah, congratulations," and literally 2 seconds later went back to talking about Brooke's achievements. After dinner, when most people were in the living room watching the football game, my cousin asked me to come outside to the patio because she wanted to talk. She told me she'd been at Brooke's bridal shower a few months ago. He obviously wasn't invited, and that Brooke had said things about me. Apparently, she told everyone that I was jealous of her, that I'd always competed for our dad's attention, and that I'd tried to ruin her wedding by making drama about the dates. My cousin knew the truth because we're close, but she told me that basically Brooke had been rewriting the whole narrative, making me look like the villain of the story. And here comes the part that really made me explode. My cousin told me that during that bridal shower, one of the aunts had asked if there weren't any other dates available for the wedding, and Brooke literally said, in her exact words, according to my cousin, "Oh, there were other dates. But I chose that one specifically because I wanted to see if my stepdad would choose me or Allison, like a test." She chose my wedding date as a loyalty test for my dad, and he passed her test by choosing her until the last second when she herself uninvited him. When my cousin told me that, I felt like finally all the puzzle pieces fit together. Everything had been deliberate, all the competition, all the manipulation, and my dad had been a willing participant in all of it. It wasn't that he didn't realize what he was doing, it was that he was actively choosing Brooke over me again and again, completely aware of the damage he was causing. I went back inside, found my dad in the kitchen alone, and asked him directly if he knew that Brooke had chosen my wedding date on purpose. He got super uncomfortable and said he didn't know what I was talking about. I told him to stop lying, that I'd already found out everything, and he finally admitted that, yes, Brooke had told him there were other dates available, but that one was perfect for her. I asked him if at any point it seemed problematic to him that his daughter wanted to compete directly with his other daughter on her wedding day, and he said it wasn't as serious as I was making it sound, that they were just dates on a calendar. That's when I finally said everything I'd been holding in for years. I told him he'd been a terrible father to me, that he'd prioritized Brooke at every important moment in my life, that he'd made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I had to compete for his love and attention, when he should have had enough for both of us. I told him that when I was in the hospital after my appendix ruptured and he chose to stay with Brooke for her breakup, that showed me exactly where his priorities were. I told him that when he chose to go to Brooke's wedding over mine, that wasn't just about a date on the calendar. It was about him communicating to me that I wasn't as important. My dad tried to interrupt me several times, but I kept talking. I told him that for a long time I'd thought maybe the problem was me, that maybe I wasn't interesting enough or needy enough or something, but that now I understood the problem was never me. The problem was that he'd decided to be the hero in Brooke's story, and in the process had become the villain in mine. I told him I was tired of trying to win his approval, tired of being the understanding daughter who always understood when he didn't show up, tired of feeling like I had to apologize for existing and needing a father. I set clear boundaries right there. I told him I wasn't going to keep having a relationship with him if it meant continuing to be treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I told him that if he wanted to have any kind of relationship with me in the future, he needed to acknowledge the damage he'd caused, not minimize it or justify it, really acknowledge it. And I told him I needed time without contact to process everything and decide if I wanted to try to rebuild something with him or just move forward with my life without him. To be honest, the look on his face was like he was finally understanding something, but he was also angry. He told me I was being unfair, that he'd always loved me, that he'd done the best he could. I told him that doing the best he could wasn't enough when his best had left his daughter feeling invisible and unwanted. I left that Thanksgiving house before dessert and haven't talked to him since. As for Brooke, I decided to cut her completely out of my life. I blocked her number, her social media, everything. I don't need someone who sees my life as a competition. She has to win. Bailey sent me a message recently saying she understood why I did what I did, and that she hoped someday we could have our own relationship separate from all the drama, which was nice. Now, 6 months after my wedding, I'm in therapy, processing all of this. My therapist says it's normal to have these feelings of loss and anger, that it's okay to set boundaries even with family, and that I don't have to feel guilty for prioritizing my mental health. Lucas has been incredible through all of this. Never pressures me to forgive my dad or to fix things before I'm ready. My mom and Mark continue to be my main support system, and honestly, Mark has been more of a father to me in these last few years than my biological dad in my whole life. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if maybe I should have been more patient or more understanding. But then I remember all the times I was patient, all the times I was understanding, and how it never changed anything. I remember being in that bridal room on my wedding day, hearing my dad tell me, "So I guess I can walk you down the aisle after all," as if he was doing me a favor, and I know I made the right decision. Last week, Lucas and I were organizing wedding photos to make an album, and there's this photo of Mark and me walking down the aisle. He's looking at me with so much pride, and I'm genuinely smiling, and you can see in the image that that was the right moment with the right person. I don't need someone who chooses me when their first option doesn't work out. I deserve someone who chooses me always, without conditions. And that's exactly what I have with Lucas, with my mom, with Mark, with friends who've become chosen family. Maybe someday my dad will understand what he lost, or maybe he never will. Either way, I'm learning to be okay with that.